The dusty street of Quartz Hill, California, fell silent as Mabel Lawson's large body crashed into the mud with a sickening splash, her market basket spilling freshly purchased vegetables across the muck. It was the spring of 1878, and the morning rain had left the main street a treacherous path of slippery earth that now clung to her best Sunday dress, the only one that still fit her expanding frame. "Best watch where you're stepping, cow." Thomas Wilcox sneered, his laughter echoing off the wooden storefronts as he dusted his hands. Behind him, his three companions joined in the cruel chorus, their faces twisted in mockery. "Maybe if you weren't taking up the whole street, folks could pass." Tears stung Mabel's eyes as she struggled to right herself, her hands sinking deeper into the mud with each attempt. At 28, she'd grown accustomed to the taunts, the sideways glances, the whispers that followed her through town. After her father's death 2 years prior, grief had driven her to find solace in food, and her body had expanded accordingly. The townspeople's kindness had diminished in equal measure. "That's enough, Wilcox." The voice came sharp as a bullwhip from across the street. Heads turned to see Hank Ellis dismounting his dun stallion, his tall frame unfolding from the saddle with fluid grace. His dark hat shadowed piercing blue eyes that now narrowed dangerously at the group of men. At 32, Ellis had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled horsemen in the county, breaking wild mustangs for the Transcontinental Railroad and local ranchers alike. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a life lived under harsh sun and harsher conditions. "This ain't your business, Ellis," Wilcox spat, though he took an instinctive step backward. "I'm making it my business." Hank's voice remained level, but his hand rested casually near his holster, the implied threat clear enough to make the four men shift uncomfortably. "Now move along before I decide to teach you some manners." The standoff lasted only seconds before Wilcox and his friends retreated, muttering curses under their breath as they disappeared into the saloon. Hank approached Mabel with measured steps, his spurs jingling softly in the sudden quiet. Without hesitation, he extended both hands. "Miss Lawson, may I help you up?" Mabel's cheeks burned with humiliation. I can manage, Mr. Ellis." "I'm sure you can," he replied evenly, "but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her mud-caked hands in his. With surprising strength and gentleness, he lifted her to her feet in one smooth motion, steadying her when she wobbled slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes as she tried unsuccessfully to brush the mud from her ruined dress. "Your vegetables," Hank said, already kneeling to gather the scattered produce. He retrieved her basket and carefully collected each item, wiping them clean with his handkerchief before placing them back inside. Passers-by had slowed to watch the spectacle, and Mabel felt their stares like physical weight. "Please don't trouble yourself," she murmured. "I should just go home." "I'll walk with you," Hank said, offering his arm as naturally as if they were old friends. "That's not necessary. The mud's slick today," he interrupted, his expression revealing nothing but simple courtesy. "I'd be happy to carry your basket and see you safely home, Miss Lawson." Something in his steady gaze made further protest die on her lips. Hesitantly, she placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt sleeve. They walked in silence for several moments, leaving the business district behind. The modest homes of Quartz Hill lined the dirt road leading toward the outskirts where Mabel's small house stood. "I appreciate what you did back there," Mabel finally said, her voice barely audible above the sound of their footsteps. "But you shouldn't have troubled yourself." "I'm used to Thomas and his friends." Hank's jaw tightened. "No one should have to get used to being treated that way, Miss Lawson." Mabel, she corrected softly. After fishing someone out of the mud, I think first names are permitted. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Hank, then. They continued walking, the silence between them gradually becoming more comfortable. When they reached the small cottage that had once belonged to her parents, Mabel felt an unexpected reluctance to end their walk. "This is me," she said, gesturing to the weathered white house with its neat garden and blue trim. Hank handed her the basket. "You've got a fine place here. Those roses look well tended." "My mother planted them," Mabel explained, surprised by his notice. "I try to keep them the way she would have wanted. You've done her proud, I'm sure." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "If you don't mind my asking, do you live here alone?" The question might have seemed forward from another man, but his tone held nothing but respectful concern. "I do," she acknowledged. "Since father passed 2 years ago." Hank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That can't be easy. A place this size needs constant attention." "I manage," Mabel said, lifting her chin slightly. "I take in mending and do some bookkeeping for Mr. Goldstein at the Mercantile." "Resourceful," Hank remarked with what seemed like genuine admiration. "Still, if you ever need help with anything that requires a taller reach or stronger back, I'd be happy to assist." Mabel studied him, searching for any hint of mockery or pity in his face. Finding none, she offered a small smile. "Thank you, Hank. That's very kind." He replaced his hat and tipped the brim. "Good day, Mabel. I hope tomorrow treats you better than today has." As he turned to go, she called after him. "Why did you help me?" "Really?" Hank paused, looking back over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable for a moment before he answered simply. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I've seen how this town treats folks who don't fit their narrow ideas of who belongs." With that enigmatic statement, he continued down the path, leaving Mabel watching his retreating figure with curious eyes. The next morning, Mabel awoke to a knock at her door. Wrapping herself in a shawl over her nightdress, she cautiously approached the entrance, uncommon visitors at this hour typically bearing bad news. When she opened the door, she found no one there, only a small burlap sack sitting on her porch. Inside were vegetable seedlings, tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, each carefully wrapped in damp cloth to keep the roots moist. A folded note accompanied them. "Noticed your garden has space for vegetables. These are spare from my plot behind the livery, good for summer eating. H.E." Mabel stood on her porch, staring at the gift with a mixture of confusion and something warmer she couldn't name. It had been a long time since anyone in Quartz Hill had shown her such thoughtfulness. Later that morning, after planting the seedlings in a freshly turned corner of her garden, Mabel found herself walking toward the livery stable at the edge of town. She told herself it was simple courtesy to thank Hank for his gift, nothing more. The livery was a large wooden structure, its wide doors open to catch the spring breeze. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and horses greeted her as she hesitated at the entrance. "Hello," she called. "Back here," came Hank's voice from one of the stalls. She followed the sound to find him brushing down a magnificent black stallion with a white blaze. The horse snorted at her approach, and Hank murmured something soothing to the animal before looking up. "Mabel," he said, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "This is a nice surprise." "I wanted to thank you for the seedlings," she said, clasping her hands in front of her. "It was very thoughtful. They needed a good home." He patted the horse's flank and stepped out of the stall. "Did you get them planted just this morning? They'll get good sun where I put them." She shifted her weight, suddenly aware of how large she must look in the confined space of the stable. "I didn't know you worked here." "I don't. Not officially." Hank leaned against the stall door. I rent the room upstairs and help old Joe with the horses when needed. I'm mostly on the road, working wherever there are horses that need breaking or training. That sounds like a lonely life, Mabel observed, then immediately wished she could take back the too personal comment. Rather than taking offense, Hank nodded thoughtfully. It can be. But there's a certain freedom in it too, no one place to disappoint you. The statement hung between them, revealing more than perhaps he intended. Well, Mabel said after a moment, I should let you get back to your work. Actually, I was about to take a break. He gestured toward the back door of the stable. I was going to have some coffee. Would you care to join me? It's not fancy, but it's strong. Mabel hesitated, unused to such invitations. I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be, he assured her. Truth is, conversation over coffee would be welcome. Gets quiet around here with just the horses for company. His easy manner made the decision simpler. Then yes, I'd like that. The back room of the livery was small but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner where a coffee pot simmered. Hank poured 2 tin cups and offered her the lone chair, taking a seat on an upturned crate himself. Sugar, he asked, holding out a small tin, please. As they sipped the strong brew, Hank asked about her bookkeeping work, seeming genuinely interested in her explanations of how she helped local businesses keep their accounts in order. I've always had a head for figures, she explained. My father taught me. He wanted me to have skills beyond just household management. Smart man, Hank commented. Though I confess, numbers make my head swim. Give me a wild horse any day, at least I can read their intentions. Mabel laughed softly. Numbers don't change their minds or try to throw you off their backs. Fair point. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. How long have you lived in Quartz Hill? All my life, she answered. My parents came west during the gold rush in '49 but settled here to open a small general store instead of mining. After Mother died from fever when I was 16, Father and I kept it going until his heart gave out 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Hank said simply. Mabel shrugged, the grief an old companion now. The railroad changed everything anyway. Bigger stores with better supply chains made our little shop obsolete. I sold it after Father died. It's the haberdashery now. And you? Hank asked. What's your story? Orphaned at 12 in Missouri, he replied, his tone matter of fact. Ran with a bad crowd for a while, then found work with a horse trader who taught me everything I know. Been working with horses ever since, moving where the work takes me. And it brought you to Quartz Hill, for now. He refilled their cups. The railroad's bringing in wild Mustangs from Nevada that need breaking for their work crews. Could be here a few months at least. Mabel nodded, wondering why the news of his temporary stay felt like a small disappointment. Well, Quartz Hill isn't much, but I suppose it has its charms. It's growing on me, Hank said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his coffee. Their conversation continued easily, touching on the town's history, the changing landscape as the railroad expanded west, and lighter topics like their preferred seasons and foods. Mabel was surprised to find herself laughing at Hank's dry observations about local characters, including the pompous bank manager who was terrified of horses, but insisted on owning the finest buggy in town. It wasn't until the stable owner, Joe, called for Hank that they realized an hour had passed. I should go, Mabel said, suddenly self-conscious again. Thank you for the coffee. The pleasure was mine, Hank replied, walking her to the front of the livery. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. The invitation was casual, but something in his expression made Mabel wonder if it meant more than simple politeness. I'd like that, she said carefully. As she walked home, Mabel found herself smiling despite the curious glances from townspeople she passed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd had a conversation where her size hadn't seemed to matter at all. Over the next 2 weeks, Mabel found reasons to pass by the livery several times, and Hank seemed equally inventive in creating opportunities to cross her path. They shared coffee twice more, and once he helped her carry a heavy bolt of fabric home from the mercantile. On a warm Saturday in late May, Mabel was tending her garden when a shadow fell across the row of beans she was weeding. "Those seedlings are coming along nicely," Hank observed, his hat in his hands. Mabel looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "They are. They'll be ready for harvest before you know it." "I was wondering," he said, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his voice, "if you might like to join me for the town social next Saturday evening. They're having music and dancing on the green." Mabel froze, her heart suddenly racing. She hadn't attended a social event in over a year, not since the last time she'd tried and overheard cruel comments about how the floorboards might give way beneath her weight if she attempted to dance. I don't think that would be wise," she said carefully. Hank's brow furrowed. "May I ask why not?" She gestured vaguely at herself. "People will talk. You're well respected here and I'm—" "You're what?" he prompted when she trailed off. Mabel sighed, brushing dirt from her hands as she stood. "Hank, you know how people see me. I'm the fat spinster who lives alone at the edge of town. If you escort me to a social, you'll be subjecting yourself to the same ridicule I face every day." His expression hardened. "Do I strike you as a man who cares overmuch what others think?" "You should care," she insisted. "Your reputation affects your livelihood." "My reputation is built on my work with horses, not on who I choose to spend my time with," he countered. "And I would like to spend next Saturday evening with you, Mabel Lawson, if you'll have me." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "Why?" she asked, the question barely audible. Hank took a step closer. "Because in these past weeks, I've come to enjoy your company more than anyone else's in this town. Because you're intelligent and kind, with a quiet strength that I admire. Because when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you give to passers-by, it lights up your whole face in a way that makes me want to see it happen again and again." Mabel stared at him, speechless. "You don't have to answer right now," he added gently, "but I hope you'll consider it." She swallowed hard, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted desperately to accept, while another part was certain this could only end in humiliation. "I'll think about it," she finally managed. Hank nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. "That's all I ask." He replaced his hat. "Those tomatoes will need steak soon. I could bring some by tomorrow if you like." The mundane offer, following his heartfelt words, somehow made the moment easier to bear. "Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you." After he left, Mabel sat on her porch swing, her gardening forgotten as she turned their conversation over in her mind. No man had ever spoken to her that way before, not even when she'd been slimmer in her youth. The few suitors who had called on her then had been more interested in her father's store than in her. Could she trust Hank's interest? Or was this some elaborate joke at her expense? The next day, true to his word, Hank arrived with wooden stakes for her tomato plants. They worked side by side in companionable silence, tying the growing vines to their supports with strips of cloth. "I've been thinking about your invitation," Mabel said as they finished the task. Hank straightened, waiting. "I'll go," she said, her hands nervously smoothing her apron. "But I want you to know that you can change your mind at any time, even at the last minute, and I won't hold it against you." A flash of something like hurt crossed his face before he controlled it. "I won't be changing my mind, Mabel, but I'm glad you've decided to come." "I don't have anything suitable to wear," she admitted. "My good dress was ruined in the mud that day." "Whatever you wear will be fine," he assured her. "But if it matters to you, Mrs. Chen at the laundry is handy with a needle. She might be able to help if you have fabric." Mabel nodded, already mentally inventorying the material she had stored away. "I'll speak with her tomorrow." Over the next few days, Mabel worked with Mrs. Chen, a kind Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed to build a successful laundry business with her husband. Together, they fashioned a simple but elegant dress from deep blue fabric Mabel had been saving for someday. The cut was more flattering than Mabel had thought possible for her figure, with a modest neckline and sleeves that disguised the heaviness of her arms. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Chen declared when Mabel tried on the finished garment. "Mr. Ellis will be very pleased." Mabel blushed. "We're just friends." Mrs. Chen's knowing smile said she thought otherwise, but she merely nodded. Friends is good beginning. By the time Saturday arrived, Mabel's nerves were frayed from anticipation and doubt. She had almost convinced herself to send a note canceling their plans when a knock came at her door precisely at 6 o'clock. Taking a deep breath, she opened it to find Hank standing on her porch, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes that, while simple, were clearly his best. His dark hair was neatly combed, and in his hands he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These are for you," he said, offering the colorful blooms. "They're not as fine as your roses, but I thought you might like them." "They're beautiful," Mabel said sincerely, taking the flowers. "Thank you. Please come in while I put them in water." As she arranged the wildflowers in a jar, she felt Hank's eyes on her. "That color suits you," he said when she turned back to him. "Blue brings out the gold in your eyes." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, warmed her from the inside out. "Thank you. Mrs. Chen helped me make it." "She did fine work," Hank approved. "Are you ready to go? The music should be starting soon." Mabel nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "As ready as I'll ever be." He offered his arm, and together they walked toward the town green, where lanterns had been strung between trees and a small platform erected for the musicians. Already, couples and families were gathering on blankets or at the simple tables set up around the edges of the dancing area. The conversations dimmed noticeably as they approached, heads turning to stare at the unexpected pair. Mabel felt her cheeks burning and her steps faltering, but Hank's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Just keep walking," he murmured. "Their opinions don't matter." He led her to an empty table and pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy before taking the seat opposite. The musicians, a fiddle player, a man with a banjo, and another with a harmonica, struck up a lively tune, and some of the younger couples took to the makeshift dance floor. "Would you like some punch?" Hank asked. "I think I saw a bowl on the refreshment table." "Yes, please," Mabel answered, grateful for a moment alone to compose herself. As soon as Hank walked away, Mabel heard the whispers starting at the next table. "Can't believe he brought her. Must be feeling sorry for her. Wonder what he wants from her, maybe trying to buy that house of hers cheap." Mabel kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded tightly in her lap, fighting the urge to flee. She had known this would happen, had warned Hank, but the reality of the public scrutiny was still painful. When Hank returned with 2 cups of punch, his expression told her he had overheard the comments as well. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he said nothing as he placed a cup before her and took his seat. "The music is nice," he commented, deliberately ignoring the stares still directed their way. "It is," Mabel agreed, sipping her punch to hide her discomfort. They sat through 2 more songs, making stilted small talk that was nothing like their usual easy conversations. When the musicians started a slower melody, Hank suddenly stood and extended his hand to her. "Would you dance with me, Mabel?" She looked up at him in alarm. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's an excellent idea, he countered, his hand still outstretched. Unless you truly don't want to. The challenge in his eyes was clear. Was she going to let the townspeople's opinions dictate her actions? Taking a deep breath, Mabel placed her hand in his and stood. I haven't danced in years, she warned as he led her toward the area where other couples swayed to the music. Neither have I, he admitted. We'll muddle through together. As they took their place among the dancers, the stares intensified, and Mabel heard a few barely suppressed snickers. But then Hank's hand settled respectfully at her waist, and his other hand held hers aloft in the proper position for a waltz. Just follow my lead, he said softly. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Mabel concentrated on the simple steps, surprised to find that her body remembered the dance lessons from her youth better than expected. After a few hesitant turns, she relaxed slightly into the rhythm. There you go, Hank encouraged, his blue eyes warm with approval. You're a natural. Hardly, she demurred, but couldn't help smiling at his praise. As they continued to dance, Mabel gradually became aware that the snickers had died down, replaced by curious observation. Hank guided her with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback, and she followed with increasing confidence. When the music ended, he kept hold of her hand as they walked back to their table. To Mabel's surprise, several people nodded greetings to them, including the mayor's wife who had previously never acknowledged Mabel's existence. See, not so terrible after all, Hank said as they sat down. Mabel shook her head in wonder. I don't understand. Why are they suddenly being civil? People respect courage, he replied simply. And standing up to their judgment takes courage. They stayed for another hour, even dancing a second time to a livelier tune that left them both laughing and breathless. By the time they left, walking hand in hand back toward Mabel's house under a canopy of stars, the evening had transformed from a dreaded ordeal into something unexpectedly wonderful. At her porch, Hank stopped, still holding her hand. Thank you for coming with me tonight, Mabel. I enjoyed every minute. So did I, she admitted. Even the terrifying parts, he chuckled, the sound rich in the quiet night. You were braver than I expected, and I already thought you were plenty brave. The compliment warmed her, and she looked up to find his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mabel, he said, his voice low. May I call on you properly, not just as a friend, but with the intention of courting you if you're amenable? The question stunned her. Despite the pleasure of the evening, she had not allowed herself to hope for anything beyond friendship. You want to court me? She repeated, certain she had misunderstood. Very much, he confirmed, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. I've never met anyone like you, Mabel Lawson. You've been in my thoughts constantly these past weeks. She shook her head slowly. Hank, I'm not. I mean, look at me. I'm not the kind of woman men court. You're exactly the kind of woman this man wants to court, he corrected gently. Your size doesn't define you, Mabel. It's just part of you, like my height is part of me or the color of our eyes. What matters to me is who you are inside, your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet strength. Tears pricked at Mabel's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he assured her. Think about it. I'll come by tomorrow and you can give me your answer then. She nodded, still overwhelmed by his words. Good night, Mabel, he said softly, lifting her hand to his lips for a brief, gentle kiss that sent shivers through her entire body. Good night, Hank, she whispered as he released her hand and stepped back. She watched him walk away, her mind spinning with possibilities she had long ago stopped allowing herself to imagine. The next morning, Mabel woke early, her thoughts immediately returning to Hank's unexpected proposal of courtship. She moved through her Sunday routine in a daze, attending church service where she noticed more greetings and fewer sideways glances than usual. After returning home and changing into a simpler dress, she sat on her porch swing, watching the road for Hank's approach. When he appeared just after noon, leading his horse rather than riding it, her heart skipped a beat. "Good afternoon," he called, tying the animal to her fence post before approaching. "Hello," she responded, suddenly shy after the intimacy of the previous night's conversation. He took off his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday rest." "Not at all," she assured him, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the swing. Hank sat down, placing his hat on his knee. For a moment, they swayed in silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," Mabel began. "And?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could sense the tension in him. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, but of what might happen. You're not planning to stay in Quartz Hill forever, Hank. Your work will take you elsewhere eventually, and I don't know if I could bear becoming attached only to watch you leave." He nodded slowly, considering her words. "That's a fair concern. I can't promise I'll never have to travel for work, but I can promise that if our feelings develop in the way I hope they might, I would find a way to make Quartz Hill my permanent base." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Mabel found herself wanting desperately to believe him. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," he continued quietly. "I know it's been a short time, and I understand your caution, but I'm asking for a chance, Mabel, a chance to show you that what I feel is real and lasting." She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception or pity. Finding none, she took a deep breath. "Yes," she said simply. Hank blinked. "Yes, yes, you may court me." A smile spread across her face at his stunned expression. "Though I still think you're either the bravest man in California or the most foolish." Joy transformed his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple she hadn't noticed before. "Maybe a little of both," he conceded, taking her hand in his. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Their courtship proceeded with a blend of traditional propriety and practical companionship that suited them both. Hank called on Mabel regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, fresh berries he'd picked, or a pretty handkerchief he'd purchased from a traveling peddler. More often, though, he brought his skills and labor. Together, they repaired the sagging back step of her house, painted her kitchen a cheerful yellow, and expanded her vegetable garden. Mabel, in turn, mended his shirts, packed him hearty lunches when he worked long hours, and shared with him the recipes and domestic knowledge that had been passed down from her mother. As summer deepened toward autumn, their relationship grew increasingly comfortable, the initial awkwardness giving way to an easy intimacy that neither had experienced before. They attended church together on Sundays, took evening walks along the creek that bordered the town, and even ventured to another social where they danced without caring who watched. The town's attitude toward them had undergone a gradual but noticeable shift as well. While there were still those who whispered behind their hands, many others had come to accept the unusual pair. Mabel found herself included in conversations at the mercantile, where before she had been politely ignored, and Hank reported that business had actually increased as word of his skill with horses spread throughout the county. On a golden afternoon in late September, they sat together on a blanket beneath an oak tree on Mabel's property. A simple picnic spread between them. The harvest from her garden had been bountiful, and she had prepared a feast of fresh bread, cheese, sliced tomatoes, and apple tarts. "I received a letter today," Hank said as he finished his second tart, "from a rancher up near Sacramento. He's offering me steady work breaking horses for his expanding operation." Mabel's hand froze in the act of pouring lemonade. "I see," she said carefully, fighting to keep her voice even. "When would you need to leave?" "I wouldn't," Hank replied, watching her closely. "I wrote back declining the offer." She looked up sharply. "But it sounds like a good opportunity." "It is," he acknowledged, "but my life is here now." A cautious hope rose in Mabel's chest. "Because of your work with the railroad." "Because of you," he corrected gently. "The railroad contract will end eventually, but what I feel for you won't." Setting down the lemonade pitcher, Mabel twisted her hands in her lap. "Hank, I don't want you sacrificing opportunities because you feel obligated to me." He reached across the blanket to take her hands in his. "This isn't about obligation, Mabel. It's about love." The word hung in the air between them, both shocking and somehow inevitable. Love. She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, love," he confirmed, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I love you, Mabel Lawson. I love your kindness and your courage. I love the way you hum when you're concentrating on a task. I love how you always see the good in people, even when they've shown you their worst. I love watching you tend your garden with the same care you give to everything important in your life." Tears filled Mabel's eyes. "I never thought anyone would say those words to me." "I plan to say them every day for the rest of our lives," Hank said, moving closer to her on the blanket. "If you'll let me." Understanding dawned on Mabel as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Mabel Lawson," he said, opening the pouch to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small pearl, "will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy and disbelief warred within her. "Are you certain?" she asked, needing to be sure. "Truly certain. Because once this is done, there's no going back, and I couldn't bear it if you ever regretted." "The only thing I would regret," he interrupted firmly, "is not spending every possible day with you. I love you, Mabel, all of you, exactly as you are." The sincerity in his eyes banished her last doubts. "Then yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Hank Ellis." With gentle hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The only thing I have left of her. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it." Mabel looked down at the pearl gleaming against her skin. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." "Not as much as I treasure you," he replied. And then, with infinite tenderness, he leaned forward to press his lips to hers in their first kiss. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, but it awakened something deep within Mabel that she had long thought dormant. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you too," she told him, the words coming easily now. "I think I have since you helped me up from the mud that day." Hank smiled, touching her cheek with calloused fingers. "Best mud puddle I ever encountered then." They were married 4 weeks later in Quartz Hill's small white church, with most of the town in attendance. Mabel wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, adorned with lace from her mother's wedding gown. Hank stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Mabel's face as they spoke their vows. The celebration afterward, held in the town square, lasted well into the evening. To Mabel's amazement, even Thomas Wilcox approached them, hat in hand, to offer awkward congratulations and an apology for his past behavior. "People can surprise you," Hank observed as they watched Wilcox rejoin the festivities. "Sometimes they just need a good example to follow." As the moon rose over Quartz Hill, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together in the little house with the blue trim and thriving garden. Hank had moved his few possessions in the day before, the upstairs bedroom now containing both his trunk and her mother's hope chest. Standing in the doorway of what was now their home, Hank swept Mabel into his arms with unexpected strength. "What are you doing?" she gasped, automatically throwing her arms around his neck to steady herself. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he answered, carefully navigating the doorway. "It's tradition." "I'm too heavy," she protested, though he showed no sign of strain. "You're perfect," he corrected, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor. "And you're mine as I am yours." In the soft lamplight, his eyes held promises that made her heart race with anticipation and nervous joy. "I never thought I would have this," she confessed, her hands resting on his chest. "A husband, a future, love." "Well, you do now," he assured her, bending to kiss her with growing confidence. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again." Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Mabel's head pillowed on Hank's shoulder, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From humiliation in the mud to perfect happiness in less than 6 months, it seemed almost unbelievable. "What are you thinking?" Hank asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "That I'm the luckiest woman in California," she answered honestly. He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "That's funny because I was just thinking I'm the luckiest man. We can't both be right," she teased. "Watch us," he replied, pulling her closer against his side. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising to the Ellis household. Hank's reputation as a horse trainer grew, allowing him to be more selective in his work and spend most nights at home. He built a small stable on their property and began breeding and training his own horses, developing a line known for both strength and gentleness. Mabel continued her bookkeeping work, but added to it by teaching the children of Quartz Hill's growing population. Her natural patience and kindness made her a sought-after instructor, and soon the front room of their home was transformed into a small schoolroom 3 afternoons a week. In their second year of marriage, to their mutual joy and slight astonishment, Mabel discovered she was expecting a child. The town doctor expressed concerns about her age and size, but she carried the baby to term without serious complications. Their son, Samuel, was born on a stormy night in March of 1881, with Hank pacing anxiously outside the bedroom while Mrs. Chen and the midwife attended Mabel. When at last he was allowed to enter, the sight of his exhausted but radiant wife cradling their newborn son brought tears to his eyes. "He's perfect," Hank whispered, carefully taking the tiny bundle into his arms. "Look what we made, Mabel." "He has your eyes," she observed, smiling tiredly as the baby's small hand curled around his father's finger. "And your heart, I hope," Hank replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "That's the finest part of you." They settled into parenthood, with the same practical partnership that had characterized their marriage from the beginning. Hank proved to be a devoted father, proudly carrying Samuel with him around town, and even fashioning a special sling that allowed him to keep the baby close while he worked with his gentler horses. Mabel's body, already ample before pregnancy, remained so afterward, but she found herself caring less about her size with each passing year. Hank's love and desire for her never wavered, and his frequent compliments and affectionate touches gradually healed wounds inflicted by years of judgment and rejection. When Samuel was 3, the Ellis family welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, whose arrival further cemented their happiness. The little girl inherited her father's dark curls and her mother's golden eyes, along with a determined spirit that kept them both on their toes. As the children grew, so did Quartz Hill. The railroad brought new businesses and families to the area, and the town expanded beyond its original boundaries. The Ellis home, once on the outskirts, now found itself part of a growing neighborhood. Through it all, Hank and Mabel remained constants in each other's lives' partners, lovers, friends. They weathered the inevitable storms of married life together. Financial worries during a drought year when horse breeding became less profitable. Mabel's grief when her dear friend Mrs. Chen passed away. Hank's broken leg after being thrown from a particularly difficult stallion. Each challenge only strengthened the bond between them, their mutual respect and affection deepening with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank surprised Mabel by closing the front door of their home behind the last of her afternoon students and presenting her with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, untying the simple string. "Open it and see," he replied, eyes twinkling with the same mischief that had first attracted her all those years ago. Inside the paper was a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of their family on one side, Hank, herself, 8-year-old Samuel, and 5-year-old Elizabeth, and an inscription on the other, "To my Mabel, who showed me what love truly means. Forever yours, Hank." "It's beautiful," she said, tears welling in her eyes as she fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, drawing her into his arms. Though her body had changed with age and motherhood, his embrace was as secure and loving as it had been on their wedding day. "Flatterer," she accused with a smile. "Honest man," he corrected, kissing her tenderly. "I love you more today than I did 10 years ago, Mabel Ellis, and that's saying something because I loved you quite a lot back then." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Settling down here with me instead of continuing your traveling life?" "Not for a single moment," he answered without hesitation. "You and our children are the best things that ever happened to me. Everything I ever wanted but didn't know to hope for." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing he had built in their 5th year of marriage, watching the stars emerge above Quartz Hill. "Do you remember that day?" Hank asked suddenly. "When I found you in the mud on Main Street," Mabel nodded, her hand finding his in the darkness. "How could I forget? It was the day my life changed." "Mine too," he said thoughtfully. "I'd seen you around town before that, you know. Noticed how people treated you. It made me angry, but I didn't do anything about it. Not until that day." "What made you step in then?" she asked, curious about something she'd never thought to question before. Hank was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I saw in your face something I recognized: dignity in the face of cruelty. It reminded me of my mother, how she kept her head high no matter how hard things got." He squeezed her hand. "But there was something else too, something I couldn't name at the time. Now I know it was the first stirring of love." Mabel leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. "Who would have thought a mud puddle could lead to all this?" "Sometimes the most beautiful journeys start in the most unlikely places," Hank observed, his arm tightening around her waist. "I'm just grateful ours started when it did, giving us all these years together." "And many more to come," Mabel added, turning her face up for his kiss. As the years continued to pass, Quartz Hill transformed from a dusty frontier town into a proper small city. The railroad brought prosperity and growth, and by the turn of the century, the main streets were paved, electric lights illuminated the business district, and automobiles had begun to appear alongside horses and buggies. The Ellis family changed too. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's head for figures. After studying at a university in San Francisco, he returned to Quartz Hill to help expand the family business into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Northern California. Elizabeth, spirited and independent, became one of the first women from their town to attend medical school. Inspired by her mother's quiet determination to pursue her own path, regardless of others' expectations. Hank and Mabel, now in their 50s, watched their children's achievements with pride, their own partnership still strong after more than 20 years of marriage. Though Hank's dark hair had silvered at the temples and Mabel's figure had changed with time, their love for each other remained constant, a beacon that guided them through life's changing landscape. In the spring of 1903, 25 years after that fateful day in the mud, they stood together in the garden behind their expanded home, surveying the fruit trees they had planted when Samuel was born, now tall and heavy with blossoms. "They've grown well," Mabel observed, her hand tucked comfortably in the crook of Hank's arm. "So have we," he replied, looking down at her with the same warmth that had been in his eyes the first time he asked her to dance. She laughed softly. "Some of us more than others," she said, patting her substantial middle without the self-consciousness that had once plagued her. "All the more of you to love," Hank said, the familiar response now a cherished part of their private language. As the sun set over Quartz Hill, casting long shadows across the garden they had tended together for a quarter-century, Mabel reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a muddy street and an act of simple kindness to a life richer and more fulfilling than she had ever dared to imagine. "Penny for your thoughts," Hank said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking," she replied, leaning into his solid strength, "that sometimes the worst moments in our lives turn out to be doorways to the best ones." He nodded, understanding immediately what she meant. "That mud puddle was the best wrong turn I ever took," he agreed, bending to kiss her forehead. As twilight deepened around them, they turned toward the house where lamps glowed in welcome, hand in hand as they had been from the beginning, two unlikely souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed, when they needed it most. And as they crossed the threshold into the home they had built together, both literally and figuratively, Mabel knew with absolute certainty that the story that had begun with humiliation and kindness had become something truly beautiful, a love that had transformed not only their own lives, but touched countless others in their growing community. It was, she thought as Hank's arm settled comfortably around her waist, exactly as it should be. Not despite the challenges and differences that might have kept them apart, but because of them, because they had both been brave enough to see beyond appearances to the hearts beneath. In a world that too often valued the wrong things, they had found something real and lasting, something worth mud and tears and struggle, something worth everything: love.